Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wittgenstein Conference 2021 on the causes and consequences of depopulation. My name is Ekaterina Zhelenkova, and I'm the coordinator of this conference, together with the organizing committee, namely Stuart Hilton-Baston, Susanna Brzozowska, Michael Kuhn, Klaus Pretner. We would like to extend our warmest greetings to all the speakers and participants. It is our pleasure to have the opportunity to host you and provide an open platform for an insightful and engaging exchange of thoughts and ideas on a topic so increasingly important and pertinent as depopulation. The conference will address and discuss the drivers of population decline, its long-term consequences for economic growth, its socio-environmental outcomes, the consequences of population decline insofar as they're driven by low fertility and migration, labor market adjustments, and many more. Those who will not be presented will have a chance to engage in conversation with the speakers and presenters during the Q&A session, as well as interact with the poster presenters in separate rooms. But before I proceed to the highlights of the conference and further information about what is going to happen over the course of the next 3 days, I would like to thank our wonderful support team for their tireless work to ensure your smooth and satisfactory experience during this conference. More specifically, I would like to thank Leora Courtney Wolfgang for her efficient social media communication, Inga Freund for arranging the cultural events, Petr Schmutz for handling the administrative communication, and Barbara Somikins for ensuring the proper implementation of all the cyber tools necessary. Yet none of this would have been possible without the thorough and dedicated involvement of the entire Wittgenstein Center team that has worked on the preparation and delivery of the conference. Thank you all once again.
Thank you, Ekaterina. Warm welcome to this conference and good afternoon from Vienna. So I'm Wolfgang Lutz. I'm founding director of the Wittgenstein Center for Demography and Global Human Capital. That's the full name. If you wonder about the name, it's based on the Wittgenstein Prize, which is the highest Austrian science prize named after Ludwig Wittgenstein. We had an opening ceremony exactly 10 years ago in the fall of 2011, actually in the Austrian parliament, in the main hall of the Austrian parliament, on the topic of demography and democracy, which, as it happens now, is also the portfolio of the Vice President of the European Commission, who you will hear in a few minutes. Now, the Wittgenstein Center rests on 3 pillars, and each of us will speak a little about one of these pillars. So I speak about the University of Vienna pillar. This is the youngest pillar. When the Wittgenstein Center was established, I was still a professor at the University of Economics in Vienna, and that university was part of the Wittgenstein Center. But then an exciting new opportunity came up, namely the University of Vienna, which is the main old university, one of the oldest universities, at least in the German-speaking world. They offered to establish a specific independent department of demography, which is quite a unique opportunity. There are not so many departments of demography in the world. So this department was formally opened in October of 2019, so it's 2 years old. And we started with 9 employees funded by the university, which includes myself as a chairholder and head of the department, then 2 tenure-track professors, 2 postdoc positions, and 3 pre-doc positions, plus in the meantime quite an additional number of further young colleagues funded by different research projects. So the Department of Demography at the university went off for a rapid start. Already after 1 year, we welcomed the first group of doctoral students. There is a doctoral school in social sciences at the social science faculty to which we belong, which now has a special track, a doctoral school in demography. And we started with 12, a large number, for the first cohort of doctoral students from really around the world, from all continents. So these students are now into their 2nd year. And we also established a new master program, which took a little longer because the university has all these procedures for approving. It's an English language master's program on global demography. And so we discussed the name and the curriculum at length. Global demography has sort of this dual meaning. It is, of course, for the whole world. We are not wanting sort of any specific regional demography, but also global in the sense of having a broader approach to demography. So here, this first cohort of about 20 master students in global demography just started now this October. Personally, I also prepared quite well for this new master's program by producing a textbook. It's called the Advanced Introduction to Demography, which tries to introduce this more global approach. As you all know, demography is defined as the scientific study of changing population size and structures, and this says structures in plural. So it's not only the age structure that we are looking at, it is multiple structures, it is place of residence, it is educational attainment, it is labor force participation. All these are demographic structures whose changes over time has an impact. And if I just read the first sentence from the cover of this book, it says, highlighting the power of multidimensional demography, this advanced introduction addresses the most consequential changes in our societies and economies using quantitative approaches. So that's what we are trying to do, and that is also very much at the heart of our meeting today, where we deal with this relatively new phenomenon of population decline, which of course comes together with population aging. And when we try to address the consequences, it just doesn't help to only focus on the size and the age structure of the population. Whether this is something that we have to really worry about or not, we really have to look also at the labor force participation, sort of which people of the so-called working ages are actually part of the labor force, which of them retire before the age of 65, which who continues to work longer, and then also the skills, like are these people productively contributing to society? So this decomposition already by labor force participation and productivity, with education being a good proxy for productivity, really are key determinants of future trends. And this also matters for the population policies. In this advanced introduction, I also do have a special section on population policies, sort of where I try to introduce national human resource management as the population policy paradigm for the 21st century. And this is sort of an analogy to big companies. Every big company has a human resource unit where they try to improve the working environment, and then try to enhance the productivity in terms of the contribution that members either of the company or, in our case, members of any state can make to their society to help improve life for everybody, for all the members in the society. Since the population policies under this broader multi-dimensional focus not only affects the birth rates and the death rates and migration, these are of course very important parts of it, but it also concerns education policies, as well as migration by level of education, like this whole issue of brain drain and brain gain. It also includes pension policies and sort of female labor force participation, compatibility between work and family. So many of these issues that we demographers have for long been working on, viewing them in a sort of coherent, multi-dimensional context. And this is a topic that is also being picked up by UNFPA in Europe. You may know over the coming days, there also is in parallel, so to say, a UNFPA conference in Sofia that deals with similar topics. And actually the panel that is organized by UNFPA tomorrow afternoon is also in that spirit. So I think this conference chose to address a really hot new topic. And I'm convinced that we'll, at the end of the conference, have many new insights. And it's clear that sort of the conventional toolbox of population policies and population analysis is not sufficient for addressing the concerns that many governments, but also many citizens have about this issue of population decline or depopulation, to use a somewhat more drastic word. Okay, with this, I stop and I hand over. I think Raya is the next to speak about YASA.
I'd like to join Wolfgang and the organizer to give you a warm welcome to the Wittgenstein Center Conference 2021. So actually, why I'm pleased to see that the ongoing pandemic, including the new variant Omicron, didn't stop us from having our conference, but I still have a high hope that next year we can really meet in person in Vienna. That was our hope last year, but then, you know, the pandemic is ongoing. But as Ekaterina said, that we still want to do our best to provide you with some experience of visiting Vienna. So I really highly encourage you to join our cultural events. You have heard today at 7 p.m. on Wednesday at 8 a.m. And I have to say that it was my first time to visit the museum online last year, and it was really, really great experience. So please do so. So now let me introduce you to the Population and Just Societies program and YASA at the International Institute for Crisis Analysis at YASA. This also explains why I'm not using the conference background like the other, because I just want to show you a little bit where we are located. So YASA is one of the 3 pillars of the Wittgenstein Center, located about 15 kilometers south of Vienna in the former 18th century imperial palace of the Habsburg monarchy in Luxembourg. So that's our office pretty much. It's a big palace, and actually next year YASA will have its 50th anniversary, and there will be a series of events. So I welcome you to check our website as well. So there would be conferences and meetings, also plan to be on site. So let's see on that. And earlier this year, YASA has started a new structure operating under 6 research programs. And I'm the director of the Population and Just Societies program, or we call it shortly PopJust, where we continue and build upon research activities that previously undertaken in the YASA World Population Program, which previously led by Wolfgang for, I think, for 28 years. So I sort of take over. And then our program now focuses not only on modeling current and future population size, structure, composition, and distribution using multidimensional population projection, which Wolfgang had just mentioned, but we also look at the human impacts on the ecosystems, as well as the impact of the environmental and societal changes, such as population aging, on human well-being. So we have a strong focus on population heterogeneity. So we try to empirically take into consideration equity and the just distribution of opportunities, outcomes, and processes as well. So we work closely, so at YASA, as one of the pillars of the Wittgenstein Center, we work closely with Wittgenstein Center colleagues, and also we also extend our collaborations to other programs at YASA. Especially what we try to do is to account for the feedback loops of the relationship between human system, the natural system, and also the economic systems. So on the economic side, so thanks to the newly established Economic Frontiers program, which is directed by Michael Kuhn, who is one of the organizers of this conference. So we also try to work closely together on this side as well. So this brings me to the very topic of the conference, which is about the causes and consequences of depopulation. So I want to touch a little bit upon its relationship with the ecosystem and climate change. So the link between climate change and depopulation. So actually, on the one hand, we can think that the consequences of depopulation, it's actually good for the planet, because less demand, less consumption, less greenhouse gas emissions. So it will help to slow down global warming and can even bring back biodiversity. Well, this tends to be a world view of ecologists and climate scientists, which look at the role of human population in a quite simplistic way, right? So they tend to say that population growth is linearly linked with higher impact on the environment. So here I think actually demographer can play a lot of role in providing better understanding of the impact of human population, because we can look at heterogeneity. So for instance, consumption has a positive relationship with GDP, and GDP actually, if you decompose, actually has high impact on greenhouse gas emissions than population size alone. And this is something that we should emphasize. So even Europe, for instance, has lower fertility, but per capita consumption is still much higher than sub-Saharan Africa. So this kind of heterogeneity should be factored in the study of human impact on the environment. And we need demographers to do this. Likewise, another field of study that we don't have much empirical knowledge is on the consequences of migration on the environment. So would higher migration lead to higher environmental impact at the destination area due to increasing population size, and can be vice versa? This depends pretty much on who migrates, who stays, and also the spatial distribution, because sometimes per capita emissions can actually be lower in the city compared to the rural area because of the population, the higher population density in the city and economy of scales. So it's a topic that is worthwhile studying. And of the equal importance is to study the impact of climate change on population dynamics and possibly impact of climate change on depopulation. So this is actually the central focus of my ESC consolidator grant, which I will kick off the project on 1st of January next year. So since the project hasn't started yet, so I don't really have concrete evidence to present, but I can only share with you the sort of the conceptual thinking behind how climate change may affect population, fertility, mortality, and migration. So let me first start with the demographic component that we do really have quite some good knowledge on relatively, which is about the impact of climate change on migration. So it's been 10 years that the field has been quite well developed now. So we do have some consolidated evidence now that climate-induced migration would be short distance, internal migration, and it's not the poorest nor the richest who will migrate. So it's a people with sort of the middle level of income may migrate due to climate change. So in this case, depopulation due to climate change can happen, but with geographical and socioeconomic heterogeneity. So now the question that we often got asked is what will happen in the world where warming, average global temperature increase, so say by 3 degrees Celsius, which is the trajectory that the world is moving towards by the end of the century if no actions have been taken. So this was estimated by the recent report of the IPCC. In the world of 3 degrees, many places will certainly become inhabitable due to heat, extreme events, or loss of lands due to sea level rise. So we can also imagine that depopulation would be the obvious consequences, but when and where and for who is a question we should address. So about mortality, we can draw upon the studies from the health field, right? So we may expect lower excess mortality in winter due to less cold days, but then significant increase in heat-related mortality in summer because of increase in extreme heat days. But would these two effects cancel each other out, or would there be harvesting effect that heat wave affect the older population, which would have died anyway later on? So we don't know. And here I would like to encourage experts in health and mortality to sort of help me out on this, because climate change is real. And we are on the course of the world getting warmer. So it's a high time that demographers account for such changes in our estimation. And finally, about fertility, this is the most unknown territory. We know from health study and studies that look at animals that heat stress directly negatively affects reproductive function and fertility. And also indirectly extreme events can affect food security or income, which then affects reproductive health. At the same time, we also see that younger people in Europe express the intention to have no children due to climate change. But we have no idea what's actually happened when they reach the sort of the real reproductive age. So maybe when they reach age 35, what will happen, we don't know. So will climate change lead to depopulation due to its negative effect on fertility? So there's still a lot to study. And I think this can potentially be a very hot topic under a hotter climate to focus on. So to conclude, I think climate change would play a role on the population, but to what extent, where, and for which subgroup of population it remains to be investigated. So with this, I wish you a fruitful 3-day and lively discussions, and I would like to pass on to Alexia now then.
Yeah. So let me welcome you also all to our Wittgenstein conference on causes and consequences of depopulation. And it's my task now to introduce the third pillar of the Wittgenstein Center, which is the Vienna Institute of Demography. And let me just also mention that the Vienna Institute of Demography is part of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And the Austrian Academy of Sciences is a quite old institution. It was founded in 1847. And basically it was mainly a learned society. And it started to be also one of the leading research organizations in Austria beginning from the 1960s. And this was the time where new institutes were founded at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And last but not least, also in 1975, it was the Vienna Institute of Demography, which was founded as part of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. But honestly speaking, we were extremely small. We started, I think, with 1.5 people, so we don't have integer numbers only in the labor force, and only during some additional years, decades, we really were growing. And it was in 2002 when the Vienna Institute of Demography was in a sense getting its new director. It's Wolfgang Lutz, and it was the time when there was really kind of an upspring of demography also in Europe through the Max Planck Institute of Demographic Research that the Austrian Academy of Sciences aimed to invest also into demography in Austria. And it's without exaggeration to say, I mean, that we started in 1975 to be a player in demography in Austria, moved to a European player in demography, I think in 2002, and in 2021, I think we can call us as a worldwide player in demography at the Vienna Institute of Demography. And related to YASA, I can tell you in about 4 years, we will also have half of a century of the Vienna Institute of Demography. We will celebrate our 50th birthday. Now to the contents, what are we involved in at the Vienna Institute of Demography? We are basically covering, I mean, the essential dynamics, I think, also in demography, like we have a fertility and family group led by Tomasz Sobotka. We have a group on health and longevity headed by Mark Louis. And of course, we have another also group on migration, education and environment led by Jesus Crespo-Quaresma. In addition to these 3 groups, we have 4 further groups looking also at the consequences of demographic change. First of all, that's the group on demography of Austria, which is led by Isabella Buber and Richard Gisser. We have another group on population dynamics and forecasting by Sergei Sherbov. We have a group which is very strongly involved in the organization of this year's Wittgenstein conference, is the Economic Demography Group. Currently, I'm leading this group together with Gustav Feichtinger. And we have a group on human capital data led by Angosho. So all these 7 groups are working together on the most pressing issues we face in demography, its consequences in the future. And I'm extremely happy that we are part of the Wittgenstein Center and have even more weight in the worldwide demography scene. So before I'll give over to the really leading persons of this conference, let me also give you a little bit of a background on some economic aspects of depopulation, and only a few aspects, and you will hear and be informed about many more of these economic consequences by David Bloom, by a special session on the economics of depopulation, so it can be just a really brief insight. And I'm referring to a publication I was working on, and it was really with Tomasz Sobotka, who has a long background in these studies on demographic change in Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe. And in a publication together with Tomasz, we were arguing that persistent low fertility and high out-migration are really the challenges which will last for many generations to come in these countries. And of course, this is only an example, and we have many more, of course, regions in the world where we observe similar trends. more specific, what we really observe in these countries and in many parts also in the world, in the industrialized world, there's a combination of declining population. So it's particularly in more peripheral regions, but also accelerated population aging and the shortage of the labor force together with out-migration of younger, more educated people. So that's a demographic trend I think we are facing in the years to come. Now the question is, will there be a vicious circle of demographic, social and economic decline, and possibly with governments unable to sustain the existing welfare arrangements we observe nowadays? So this is really kind of the discussion and fear of many people. But our conference, I think, will show you that there are these challenges, but there are solutions, but we have to act early enough. So let me just pose some of the questions which are around, I think, in public discussions. Is there a pressure on health and social spending, outpacing possibly the GDP growth? Will there be a collapse of our social security systems? That's an urgent kind of argument often when we talk about depopulation. Another question is, are there enough resources left to support the younger generations and boost spending on education, families, and infrastructure? We do need these spendings, but can we afford them in the future? At the same time, we also are concerned about shrinking numbers of people at productive ages. Are they eroding, in fact, our tax base on which government spending is based? And another point is, of course, the brain drain. Are high-skilled immigrants, I mean, from many countries we observe in Southern, Eastern Europe, does it lead not only to a labor shortage, but to a skill shortage? I mean, these are just a few of the fears we have. But, and this is our task also, we should propose that there are compensating mechanisms around, but we have to really take them up. Just as an example, we do see that productivity does not necessarily have to decrease with age if we invest into education early enough, not just at age 50, but on an early enough investing into education, into the skills, into competencies. And also we have to raise productivity, I think, over the life course, continued training, etc. Only one mechanism. Another mechanism, of course, we're observing, there might be increased savings and investment due to living longer. You want to save. We see increasing female labor force participation. We see increases in retirement ages in many countries in Europe nowadays also, etc. I could continue, but there are mechanisms around which could, in a sense, counteract all these fears. But I think it's clear, to be honest, also, that without institutional setups, without functional institutions and strong governance, we will not be able to use these mechanisms. Just let me speak about, for example, like we do need really good family policies to really help females to combine childbearing and working. We need good labor market institutions to allow continued training, etc. And we need, of course, to reform our welfare state and to adapt in many other kind of spheres in our social security systems. So basically, the argument I'm trying to convince you now is that there are mechanisms at play which could help us, in a sense, to really manage, I think, these demographic trends, but we need to understand them. We need to understand how they interact in different institutions, in different regions, etc. And that's also part of the task of this year's conference. Now, let me end up to really stress, I think, we need mitigation and not just adaptation to these demographic trends I have just told you at the beginning. And most importantly, we have to take into account that these demographic trends, not only that they are heterogeneous by space, by different socio-economic groups, etc., but most importantly, such demographic trends will unfold in a world that is quite different of today. And this is the really difficult task we have to consider in our simulations, in our understanding. And these unfolding trends of the future we know about them. I think we know about these climate change effects. There are this kind of technological revolutions, but there are many of these unfolding future demographic events we might not know. Who would have known about COVID about 4 years ago? And I think there are many more of these risks we have to put into our models, I think, to really cope with the changing demographic outlook. And to finally end up, I would really like to quote a colleague of mine, Nahiro Ogawa from Japan. And I was recently on a panel with him, and I really liked one of his arguments. He was arguing there's a first demographic dividend, there's a second demographic dividend. But what we really need also the third and the fourth demographic dividend, and he called the third demographic dividend is the dividend which tells us we do have to have really a healthy process of demographic aging. And the fourth demographic dividend would be that we have to age in a really cognitive high status, and we have to keep cognitive really abilities valid until our end of the life. So I think these are really good outlooks, but we have to use them and we have to understand them. So I'm very much looking forward to our sessions of the conference. I'm very much looking forward to our discussions, and I wish you all the best. Enjoy the conference and hope to see many of you in the breakout rooms at discussions or at some of the social events.